There are a few fallacies I'd like to correct before jumping into the meat of my remarks today. First of all, members of the government have said that members of the opposition and the crossbench have not brought any meaningful policy to motion time, which is completely ridiculous. It is completely ridiculous when we have initiated, as a result of our motions, inquiries into the fiasco of firearms, inquiries into the issues in planning that are affecting our housing issues. We've asked for action in health. We've called out criticisms about the record numbers of ambulance ramping in those motions, and it's resulted in change. It has resulted in change. It's resulted in the government having to release its flu strategy this year, its winter strategy this year. It's resulted in change because we brought significant issues to the chamber. And these issues that we are raising today are no less significant. The members of the government opposite have characterised this motion as a whinge, but it's all about how you think about what is the point of question time. Question time here in this chamber is one of multiple levers. The government likes to talk about how it pulls all the levers. The opposition uses the tools available to try and hold the government to account and to try and represent our constituents, to represent real local people who are banging their head against the wall because they're trying to understand decisions made by government. They want evidence, they want facts, they want reasons, and they want figures as to why the government is making different decisions and choosing to take our state down a different path. And they ask us questions, and those very often are what are brought to the chamber. Those very often are what we're raising in question time. Now, if you're actually listening to the debate, you will have heard various speakers already say that sometimes political questions are asked and political answers are given. That's not the topic that we are so frustrated by today. We are frustrated by asking legitimate questions and having political answers provided. And we have given so many examples. I have more to give today. The options are almost endless for the examples I could give. Multiple examples where reasonable questions have been asked and no answer has been provided. And not one member opposite has actually gone back and said, no, the example you've given us was not a reasonable question. The minister who's answered the question may have been able to give an example, say this is commercial in confidence, this is still under debate, this is not allowed to be provided for a particular reason. That doesn't happen. No one opposite has rebutted those examples that have been provided today. The answers that we get are often irrelevant. Some of them, particularly the two that the Honourable Julie Freeman raised today, asking simple questions, getting a long-winded, irrelevant answer, completely avoiding the question. It's a very faintly concealed attempt to waste the time during questions and have less questions asked of the government. Now, before I go further, I would like to talk about the statement made by an honourable member in this chamber who's away on urgent parliamentary business. But on the 23rd of August 2017, in her role as President, the Honourable Kate Doust made this statement about questions to ministers and parliamentary secretaries. And I'll read it in. Members, having presided over 16 question times since this chamber did me the honour of electing me its President, I want to draw members' attention to some important matters relating to the asking and answering of parliamentary questions. Questions are an important illustration of the principle of responsible government, that ministers are responsible to Parliament individually and are accountable for the administration of their own portfolios and for the acts of government collectively. Questions are directed to ministers or parliamentary secretaries in this place and not ministers in the Assembly. A minister or parliamentary secretary who represents a minister in the Assembly is personally responsible for the accuracy of the information given in this chamber. This is a function of responsible government. The relevant minister or parliamentary secretary in this chamber being responsible to this chamber for the answers they give. This House may hold only its own members responsible. It cannot punish members of the Assembly and vice versa. Thus, when it comes to the House calling ministers to account, it is restricted to those who are members of the Council. This is the reason for the constitutional requirement that at least one Minister of the Crown must be a member of this chamber. Council ministers and parliamentary secretaries cannot shed their responsibility for an answer by prefacing answers to questions with expressions such as, "The minister has provided me with the following reply." The answer given in this chamber by a member of this chamber is that member's answer. The council minister or parliamentary secretary providing it is taken to have satisfied themselves that the information is accurate. Representative ministers and parliamentary secretaries in this House are not merely a convenient postbox for the Assembly minister. In addition, questions are directed to ministers, and it is not consistent with the doctrine of ministerial responsibility to give an answer that bypasses the minister and identifies it as being given by a public servant or statutory office holder, or most recently, suggests that the inquirer direct their question to those public officers. If ministerial responsibility is to mean anything at all, it must mean that ministers politically answer for their own administration and collectively for the executive government. Public servants are answerable to their minister and may provide information and advice, but they do not answer parliamentary questions for ministers. Allowing such an arrangement would undermine the principle of responsible government. Question time in this place and question time where proper answers are given to reasonable questions is a key tool of our democracy. Now, the Labor government used to say a lot more often that it would hold itself to gold standard transparency. Now, we don't hear that as much anymore, and it's quite interesting that in responding to the actual motion itself, the motion which calls out deficiency in standard of answers, evasive and uninformed responses, the response of the Honourable Dan Caddy was to say that they give pretty good answers. That's quite an underwhelming reaction to the allegations that have been made in this motion. There's no response that's been given to say that no, our answers, there's no problems with the answers, that we do answer the questions all the time. The examples given, no one's refuted those. No one's been able to come back and defend them. And I'll give you a few more that I think are indefensible. On the 12th of August last year, I asked a question about emergency departments and wait times in hospitals. And I asked this question because our health system is in a serious state of crisis and people want assurance that the government is doing something about it. So I asked for some stats around emergency wait times for the month of July across the public health system, asking how many patients waited to see a doctor for more than 48 hours, 24 hours or 12 hours. You'd hope those numbers are pretty low. You'd also hope that they're centrally electronically recorded, because those are quite important statistics and quite an important measure of the health of our health system. But the second part of my question was, are wait times of 24 hours or more still reported to the Minister for Health? And my third question was, if no to two, why not, and when was this reporting activity ceased? Now, clearly this comes from a concern that wait times are not being reported when they used to be and they should be. This is a serious concern, and to my opposite of delight, I got a one to such and such response. You'll hear a collective groan from this side of the chamber whenever a response to a question is, I provide the following answer in response to your question 1 to 3 or 4. 1 to 3. It is not possible to answer this in the limited time frame. I ask the member to please put this on notice. Now, if your system is not good enough to give you that data that I asked for in one part of my question, okay, I will put it on notice. Expected a bit more of the health department, but I'll put it on notice. But if you cannot tell me whether wait times of 24 hours or more are still reported to the Minister for Health and you refuse to answer that limb of the question, you either don't know, which doesn't make sense, you're lazy, you can't read, or you don't want to answer the question because you don't like the answer. That's just not acceptable. It is completely unacceptable. And when we talk about projects, major projects that the government has committed a lot of money to, I've asked questions around Burswood Park, Burswood Motorplex, Burswood Racetrack, Perth Park. Sorry. I've asked several questions around the racetrack.
It's been rebranded a few times.
Hard to keep up. We don't know what it'll be next month. A different thing. The $217.5 million racetrack planned at Burswood. That's what I'm talking about. I've asked, for now, I've asked several questions asking for information. There are residents very close by to the construction who want to know about the project. They want to know that the government's considered other options, that the government has the data to justify that the price is going to be what it is and that they're going to be able to mitigate the issues. So on the 28th of May, I asked simple yes-no question, how many feasibility studies were conducted to compare Burswood Park with other potential sites, and what percentage of the total project budget will be allocated to environmental management, noise management and community impact studies. Now, the response that I got from the hard-working Parliamentary Secretary representing the Minister for Sport and Recreation was 1 to 2. The Cook Labor government was re-elected to deliver a transformative program for the Burswood Peninsula, yada, yada, yada. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines of talking themselves up and not answering the question. It's just rubbish, absolute rubbish. Another question about a month later. Actually, I did a similar approach to the Honourable Julie Freeman. I simplified the question. I didn't ask how many feasibility studies have been conducted. I asked one. Have any feasibility studies been conducted? 2, if yes, will the Minister table those studies? The response I get, you can guess it, 1 to 2. Please refer to another question. Consultation is still ongoing. No answer to my actual question. It doesn't answer a yes or no question. It's a response. It's rubbish. So you can see the frustration we have is that we're asking legitimate questions, we're asking reasonable questions. And it gets a little bit harder to take when you look at questions where experts in a particular field who have experience in this area, who've had experience in the public service, they ask questions because they're trying to get updates on where things are at in a particular area, and they know from their own experience, their past experience, that those answers should be readily available. Otherwise, they wouldn't think that it would be so hard to answer the question in question time with the notice that's provided. So the frustration when we ask questions like that is it gives us the distinct impression that someone is choosing not to provide the answer, or that our systems have gone backwards, that something that could be captured by data and easily reported is no longer being done, and it's very, very frustrating. Now, in response to the issues we've raised, the response of the government is, as is commonly the case, one of deflection. They haven't been able to respond to the actual concerns we've raised about the lack of answers in those questions. They've deflected, as they often do. They won't stand there and tell us there's no issues. They're standing there and saying, oh, you know, your government was worse in previous terms, yada, yada. We've heard it all before. We're actually wanting a response to the key issues we're raising today, the concerns we're raising today, the concerns about how democracy is failing, how democracy is not actually operating as it should be. So I think last year I definitely did a member statement, as the Honourable Kate Dowse suggested other ways to raise concerns about how these debates are handled. She said you can raise a member statement. I did a member statement and I said it feels like an episode of Yes Minister, where the people just go back and forth and you ask the question, you get a non-answer. You ask again for the question, you still get a non-answer. We have conceded that there are certainly instances that have been quite well presented where we have seen ministers or parliamentary secretaries say that they're not satisfied with the answer, and they'll go back to the minister and get us an answer. And for that, I'm deeply appreciative and I'm very grateful. I wish it happened a bit more often when we look at some of the standard of answers we get. One of the other frustrations that we have around question time is the way that the departments are structured and the portfolios are structured. Sometimes it feels like we're playing pass the parcel. particularly when there are a multitude of ministers involved in the health department. We ask a question for a particular health-related minister, and they send it to another one, and they say, send it back, you go ask it of the other minister. I'm sorry, it's not black and white listed on your website which health minister is responsible for every single aspect of the health system. Good to know. And we appreciate when you do redirect them, but it doesn't always happen. That's one of the frustrations we have. So we look at the ways that the answers are avoided, questions not given. Now, this is a legitimate concern. It's a good use of parliamentary time if it actually can potentially have any chance of actually improving the answers to some of the questions that we get. We wouldn't be raising this as an issue if we weren't so frustrated and annoyed with some of the answers that we get, the ridiculous answers to such reasonable questions. I would actually draw members' attention, if you wanted to go see a really good example of how bad things can be, I think if you'd go and look through, because I tend to have a look at a lot of the questions asked and a lot of the answers given, I would have to say that the Honourable Marika Gromwald probably gets the prize for the number of redirections, non-answers, answers that are provided in a roundabout way, so that if you actually wanted, as the average person, to go and find the government's response to the question she's asked, even if they've answered it, you have to go through this rabbit warren of information to even just try and find the answer. So these are the sorts of issues that we think are important and that need to be raised today, and this is why we are so frustrated with the government.